If you're any bit as much of a die-hard fan of the Portal series as I am, or if you've just spent enough time on the internet, chances are you've come across the Game Theorist's video where, long story short, we find out that portals could theoretically form a black hole from a simple ceiling-to-floor loop. That doesn't sound too favorable. The problem here is that once too much mass enters one wormhole, the difference between the two eventually gets so large, it accumulates the gravitational force required to pull objects moving at the speed of light. Yeah, that's a black hole. So to prevent this, we've designed a safety feature. As soon as the imbalance between the two portals exceeds 10 kilograms, or about 22 pounds, the portal device is revoked from the player until this balance is restored. In layman's terms, this means that whatever enters, for example, the blue portal, has to at some point enter the orange portal as well. Now, of course, you might think this isn't really an issue until we get the portal gun, but this imbalance persists between levels, which means that we've really got to keep it somewhat stable until we get the portal gun too. Otherwise, once we do, it'll just be dead weight. Upon leaving the glass cage we start in, the imbalance increases by 85 kilograms. That's the weight of Chell according to the game's engine. To balance this out, we can use the radio in this very room, which apparently weighs 20 kilos. You know, to be fair, compared to the size of Chell's head, this thing is a monstrosity. Anyway, by throwing the radio over the glass cage and bringing it back in through the portal repeatedly, we can eventually balance this out to just 5 kilograms, which is under the 10 kilo threshold. A similar strategy can be employed in Portal Carousel. By throwing the cube over the glass instead of bringing it through, we can avoid building a mass debt for the first portal. Then, by looping the 40 kilogram box through the blue portal a couple of times and leaving the chamber through the orange portal, we're back to our 10 kilogram safe zone. For most people, this should already be hard to follow along with. Don't worry though, it gets worse. This is where we get the portal gun, which means that half of all portals placed from here on out are entirely our own, and so there's hardly any hand-holding past this point. I feel like this is also a good time to introduce another mechanic that might come in handy later, the ability to drop the portal gun and pick it up as any other prop. I added this in after my first attempt at this mod proved many levels to be simply impossible due to the lack of props at the player's disposal. So here's the solution, an always-on-you 5 kilogram emergency prop. Yes, this does also mean that Chell becomes lighter after dropping the gun. After I was done playing around with this newfound ability, my first instinct was just to do the zero portal strategy here. I jumped to the ledge holding the orange portal. I mean, if you can beat a level without using any portals at all, it doesn't matter what gimmick is applied to them. Similarly, this next level is also doable without placing a single portal. In this case though, that would probably take significantly longer than just using a couple portals and then restoring the balance. So in the second room, I solved the level, as any speedrunner would. Yes, this is normal, believe me please, with one exception. Once the door is open, I pop the camera off the wall and bring it with me. This thing weighs 20 kilos and is pretty easy to throw around, which makes it ideal for leveling out the imbalance by repeatedly throwing it into the orange portal that you fall out of. And finally, the first true technical challenge. The next map opens up with a cage that forces you to shoot a floor portal, so immediately upon entering the level, my portal gun was revoked. Here, I've got two objectives: resolve the mass debt and, well, beat the level. The first part is rather tricky, as I have to get a whole 80-ish kilos through a portal high above the floor with no access to any props. Except one. The rock. The otherwise random piece of debris which just so happens to be pushable and just so happens to be a viable tool for getting this ramp to launch you up to the exit platform. This, however, is only a fraction of the battle. The rock itself weighs around 170 kilograms, which is overkill to say the least, and launching it into the portal would just make our problem way worse. No, instead I jump to this platform to grab one of the cubes before it falls into the goo. From here, getting back up is pretty trivial with modern speedrunning tactics. Using the ramp, I managed to launch the cube into the orange portal after only about 40 attempts. Though again, since a cube weighs only 40 kilograms, I had to do this whole process a second time. I wasn't nearly as lucky with the launch as before though, until someone suggested I try to respawn and fizzle the cube before it makes it to the portal, giving it a temporary zero gravity state. And, well, that worked, given a total of 700 attempts. Continuing the trend of levels that were just barely possible was our next map, Future Starter. Here, the only cube in the first room is enclosed in a glass cage. To get it out, you have to shoot a portal under it, building up a debt of 40 kilograms. Lucky for us, there are 2 cameras in this very room, each weighing exactly 20 kilos. After placing that first portal at an angle to leave extra room in the cage, I was able to restore the balance by throwing both of the cameras back through the incredibly high orange portal. And of course, with modern speedrun tricks, the rest was not an issue. The second room is even easier than the first. You can glitch this button to keep the exit door open and use the provided cube and camera to fly up to the exit platform. There isn't that much to say about the rest of Chapter 1 though, as both of the remaining levels are easily doable without placing a single portal. Even the intermission between chapters isn't all that much to deal with. In fact, the dual portal device that we get here gives us some additional control, making things slightly easier. Chapter 2 introduces lasers, which unsurprisingly don't add any mass to the portals. Sure, if you want to get technical, a laser does have some mass due to having a pretty high energy output. But if you actually do the math, you'd need one hell of a laser to make even a slight dent, so we'll just disregard those entirely. What I'm trying to say is, the start of Chapter 2 didn't pose much of a challenge. Another element this chapter introduces is faith plates, first in a Cakewalk Zero Portals puzzle, and then, Trust Fling. You see, normally this is a puzzle like any other, meant to present the idea of chaining multiple flings with the newly introduced faith plate element. For us, however, the issue is the pair of portals you normally have to fling through, first by yourself, followed by a cube. In our case, that would mean an unresolved mass debt of 125 kilograms. So I got to cooking. First, instead of flinging through, I used the zero portal strategy here, ramping off the first panel with enough speed to activate the scripted momentum trigger on the lower panel, bringing me to the exit platform. From here, I still needed a cube. Pressing the button for the first time has the cube dropper release a bunch of garbage, which I told myself is probably useless, right? Pressing the button again, I got the cube to come directly to me. From here, I could technically cube hop to the button, take the faith plate back, and be done with the level. But that would leave me with a mass debt of around 40 kilograms, which I can't exactly resolve without portals or a portal gun in the next map. I started wandering around, looking for anything that could add up to 0, and there it was. The garbage, or whatever was left of it. First, I would respawn the cube a second time, getting my debt up to 80 kilograms. Then, I'd take the chair from the garbage pile through the portal, adding another 20 kilograms for a total of 100. And then, to balance that out, I had the turret, weighing exactly 100 kilograms according to the game's engine, probably due to the stupid amount of bullets they put inside those things. The plan was to use the chair to clear the gap between the exit platform and one of the faith plates with a mid-air jump. This would let me repeat what I did at the start, ramping off the first angled surface to strike the momentum trigger right after grabbing the turret I had conveniently placed nearby. And now that I'm back at the exit platform, I can just toss the 100 kilo turret through the portal, achieving perfect balance. Compared to all that, the end of this chapter was a breath of fresh air. Pitflings has a fairly easy zero portals route, and Fizzler Intro has just a single laser. Chapter 3, on the other hand, starts off with an interesting one. First, I sniped this portal surface next to where the cube dropper is all the way back from the first faith plate. I knew I wouldn't get to move these portals until after I'd returned the mass balance with the cube, so getting to it was my first and only priority. I could tap the button that drops the cube by simply jumping to it, and after that, getting the cube was just a matter of re-entering the portal and using the faith plate again. And finally, to level out the balance, I used the good old trick of throwing the cube up and looping it through a couple of times. The next map has hardly anything interesting going on. After getting the cube, we can more or less proceed with a variation of the usual speedrun route. So let's skip ahead to light bridges. These are particularly fun because, guess what? We can apply the same logic as for the lasers. Since these are made of light, the equivalent of its energy in terms of mass is negligible. As long as I don't walk through any portals, I can, for a moment, forget about all the conditions I'm playing under. This makes the next couple of levels way less confusing. Now, the formal introduction of turrets begins with a relatively simple chamber. We already know from Trustling that these chonkers weigh a whopping 100 kilos, though luckily we don't need to use any portals for this one. Following that, laser relays is just a laser, turret blocker is 0 portals, laser versus turret is another laser, and pull the rug is a glorified walking simulator. Things do get interesting in laser chaining though. The task of throwing props over some ledge was more or less trivial previously, but this time the platforms are just a tad bit out of reach. Unsurprisingly, you're supposed to use portals here. Previously, I had tried to launch myself from the center of the map, cube hopping to the first platform and tossing the cube up there. But, well, turns out prop flying up there is significantly easier. The point is that once I've got the cube up there, I can use a pair of portals to bring another cube up there, line it up with the laser relay, and then use the first one to boost myself back up into the portal, restoring the balance. And the rest was just a bit of air strafing. We don't really need to solve the rest of the chamber. Then, shortly after the fabled triple laser, begins the behind-the-scenes area, mostly harmless due to its cutscene-like nature. However, issues start to arise with the very first map of Chapter 5, where we are stuck in an airlock with a half-open vault door, forced to shoot a portal through. This marks the first instance of having to resort to dropping the portal gun. In fact, this level in particular was the reason that the feature was added. By feeding it through the thin gap in the door repeatedly, we can temporarily restore the balance. But as you might have guessed, this isn't the only gap we're forced to cross with portals, and there are no other props on this level to rely on. Shortly after the main catwalk section, we have to portal up to a window high above ground. Once again, we can just throw the portal gun into the window from below and catch it after passing through the portal, thus slowly restoring the balance. We're not really close to done yet though, as there are 2 more gaps in this level, and the next one in particular is the biggest headache of them all. You see, in order to restore balance, I'd have to find some way to get from here to there and back without using portals. As far as I'm aware, that's not possible without at the very least a cube to jump off of. The only other option is to somehow throw the portal gun across this gap, which got me thinking. Sure, as impressive as Chell's arm strength may be, there's no way I'm throwing the portal gun across this gap. Instead, I dug up an old glitch discovered in 2011 that lets you grab an object through a portal and have it fly to you in a straight line from the other portal. Having the portal gun fly from the window to the catwalk this way would work, despite being a frame-perfect trick. What's interesting is that something about this glitch messes with the way the mod works, so it actually adds to the balance in reverse for some reason. All that meant for me is that I had to swap the portals and do it in a kind of counterintuitive way, but surely enough, with each time I got the timing right, my debt reduced by 5 kilos. For the last gap in this level, there really is no better way of crossing it than to simply jump across. This is a fairly well-known technique from Least Portals runs and typically doesn't take too long to execute. Me, however, despite having clocked 4,000 hours in this game, I've got horrible movement consistency, so the jump that would take some players 10 minutes took me 6 hours. But I think I'm just... What? Wait! Chotomate. Hold that save. Oh my f***ing god! Oh my f***ing god, we did it! Then, as if to let me catch my breath, turret sabotage was way less grindy and way more strategic-y. We start off once again having to cross a gap, but this time we've got an assortment of props to our disposal. At first I was going to use these 3 mugs at the start of the map to cancel out the imbalance, but that would have taken ages, as each one of these is 1 kilogram, which is still unrealistically heavy for a mug. It's just the smallest unit that the integer-based system supports. Then I remembered about the Oracle turret, which spawns on the second conveyor here. Tossing it across the gap then lets me use it to jump over the railing and over to the conveyor belt without passing through a portal. Further ahead, when we're given our first look at the turret firing range, we find ourselves in a nearly sealed off box. Here, you're supposed to portal above the dummy, then behind it, and on to the next room. But for us, that's one too many portal pass-throughs. So to simplify the equation, I managed to shoot a portal behind the dummy right away, which then let me feed the portal gun over the same gap I shot my portals through. And now, after regaining my portal firing privileges, I could shoot another portal into the room across and do the same juggling as before to stabilize. The actual sabotage process of turret sabotage doesn't really require you to use portals, at least definitely not in a way where you can't just turn back and exit the way you came from. This is a scripted sequence after all, just like a lot of the others we're about to encounter in this particular area of the game. Portals are used only as a gimmick to make these sequences more immersive, not really for puzzle solving. Still, despite that, this section holds one of the most infamous challenge-ruining levels of Portal 2, the core transfer. From a surface level look, this isn't much different from the other scripted maps we just went through, but the bottomless pit seen here is, as far as I'm aware, the largest one we have to cross during the entire campaign. Even the long grab glitch from earlier isn't enough, as the game eventually realizes you're not supposed to be holding an item this far away for this long. I had to skip this part. I mean, sure, I could have come up with some exception for this particular scenario, but that's about as good as just moving on. The rest of this level is doable without placing portals, which is unsurprising. And only after the fall did it finally dawn on me that we're entering a section of the game comprised of way too many such long portal shots, and Underground was no exception. I spent a downright stupid amount of time trying to figure out some clever way to throw the portal gun over ledges, walls, and gaps until I was eventually told to try the least portals route on this map. It involves getting on top of the level geometry by climbing the walls with some incredibly precise jumps and parkouring across to the end. Then the next level was equally scary for just the same reason. I immediately got overwhelmed by the spaciousness of this area. As a speedrunner, my instinct was to shoot a couple of portals across very wide gaps to skip major sections of the puzzle, but for the time being, I told myself to focus on short-term goals. Taking the intended path would mean flinging to the platform connecting the offices. Since that would typically leave me with unresolved mass debt, I experimented with a lot of ways to set down my two portals, accumulate debt from one of them, and then jump back into the other to hopefully clear the distance required. And after a lot of theory crafting and struggling, chat eventually convinced me to try a somewhat newly discovered glitch called squat boosting. In short, if you finish your crouching animation right as you're passing through a portal, you can get a very small height boost. Chaining multiple of these together was what let me eventually just barely clear the gap. However, as predicted before, I wasn't going to be able to beat the whole level without some added condition. In this case, I could use pause abuse to land a tick-perfect jump and go straight to the ending elevator in only a couple of portals, but there was no way I could recover that mass debt before the next map. Still, before jumping the gun and clearing my balance as soon as I loaded into the next level, I wanted to see how far we could get with 95 kilograms on the counter. Turns out, Repulsion Intro is one of those rare maps where zero portals is pretty trivial if you know what you're doing. I used the gel and some map geometry to gain enough height to get the cube, then jumped across some construction beams to get to the next chamber, where I jumped off another cube mid-air to gain enough height to get to the elevator. This is pretty standard stuff at this point. Unfortunately though, the next map would mark the end of the Zero Portals run. Multiple times over, actually. There is a potential 2-portal strategy, and I did try this for a good few hours, until I was told that even tool-assisted speedruns can't do this yet. So I moved on. And now that I had finally reset my balance on a map that lets us use gel, I get to find out how exactly this whole thing works. Turns out the first gel puzzle was timing based. Since the blobs drop at regular intervals, I had to make sure they coat the surface at the right time and that I can pass through the portal to restore the balance as soon as they have. Then, to gain height in the second room, I could jump from the gel to the wall and back repeatedly, slowly placing the portal higher and higher until it let me get up to the ledge. And this is when we discovered a very overpowered strategy. Since each gel blob weighs only 20 kilograms and our safe threshold is 10 kilograms, we can just build up a mass debt in either direction and swap the portals each time a blob is funneled. This way, we never accumulate more than the limit. Eventually, I still had to rely on offsetting the balance once and bringing the portal gun back repeatedly. But given that this included bouncing at stupendous heights, I'd say the fun value made up for the grind. And then, for the last room, I put the cube on the edge of the button, got into the elevator, and shut a portal only to nudge the cube off, making sure it doesn't actually fall back into the portal. And so, with that chamber done, immediately upon exiting the next elevator, we were once again hit by this area's biggest obstacle: a large gap. Yep, there's nothing I can really do here, and the rest of the level didn't look any more feasible on its own, so this was possibly the fastest I've given up on a map yet. So far, we've covered how blobs of gel pass through portals. They add 20 kilograms to the imbalance and can be juggled under the right circumstances. As for how a flow of gel functions, well, it doesn't. In the version of the mod I was playing in, the portals would destroy the tiny gel particles. This wasn't intended behavior by any means, though it did provide a few interesting puzzles. Here on Propulsion Intro, that meant I had to find a way to tap the button for activating the gel dropper from below and jump the ramp without getting any gel on the ramp itself. I'm making this look easy in the edit, but this process took the greater part of 2 hours. Surprisingly, getting the cube out of this cage turned out to be the bigger issue. I had assumed that I could just feed the portal gun through the hole, but you know what happens when you assume. Instead, I once again found a way to utilize newly discovered speedrunning tech. By snapping the cube near the edge of the portal, I eventually got it to clip through the wall. This isn't useful on its own, as behind that wall is nothing but a pit of goo. However, letting the cube fall into that goo would force it to respawn, and the dropper for it just so happens to be right outside of that cage. Of course, one cube wasn't enough for me, I just had to get 2. This was so that I could later use those 2 cubes to fly up the walls of the chamber and access the elevator without solving the actual puzzles. Once again, looks easy in the edit. The next map was another reminder that we'll have to make do without much gel, though somehow I did manage to get a few drops through to this ramp, and so putting the little that I had to use, I was able to get the cube and rebuild the balance. And now, if you combine a physics prop with repulsion gel and an open ceiling, you can get virtually unlimited height. In this case, that was enough to let me walk to the end on the support beams at the top of the testing sphere. We then had another few intermissions with impressive yet uncrossable gaps, so that skipped us straight to funnel intro. Just like lasers and bridges, these things project out of the portal without adding any mass. Not only does this let me solve simple chambers without changing the balance even once, but it also unlocks the ability to fly via the crouch fly glitch. This is how many chambers got outright broken from here on out. Turns out that free flight is a viable replacement for instant teleportation. So all that was left now was to figure out a way to get to Wheatley's lair and beat the final boss. Alright, good. We've got a 90 kilo offset. Let's try to see if we can salvage some of this. Okay, blue's down there. Nice. So now we can just slope down into blue. We have the portal gun. We can just do this. Yeah. Okay, that's not that bad. What we need to do is make sure Wheatley throws an extra one. Maybe we can like just move further back. Wait, we could get another bit of offset from the core. Or we could just get the first bomb to hit Wheatley here and then block all the other bombs. Wait, we're good. Wait. Oh no, we need to move the portal to the bottom. I'm stupid. And then go through portal. Okay. Just come on, slow down. Please, what? Okay, let's go through the portal again. The time will run out. No, it resets after every phase. We're good, we're safe. 15, that's salvageable with just dropping the portal gun. No, falling back out. Please. Bro. Oh, I think the bombs pushed the portal gun through. Bang. Okay. That means we've got one more phase. Drop the portal gun, pick it up. Okay, we've got 10. We've got everything we need. Let's reset it back. One bomb. Come on. Come on. There we go. Okay. In front of the rail so I don't go completely out of bounds. Right. There. Slow back down. Then go back here. Plug it in. Wait! I need my portals! Wait, okay, no, this is fine. Because we could just drop the portal gun here. And just jump through. Okay, we're good. We're good. We're good. Okay. Whew. We can just drop the portal gun back there, then go get it now. Because now we've got stable 10 kilos. Okay. Alright, we're fine. We're okay. That was cutting it close. This is the slowest re-entry possible. Anticlimactic as hell. I can see your booby trap, Wheatley. There we go. Alright. And that is a soft lock, chat. We have got 75 kilograms of offset and we need to shoot the moon.